Okay, this is lecture 10. So we're going to we talked about arrays before, but there was a certain problem with arrays, and that was they're sort of difficult to deal with, like to change their size is one issue. We saw that changing sizes of arrays was a little bit tricky, and for example, when you change the size, you often will erase the whole array, and it's just not the easiest way to deal with what we lists of things, array or arrays, but we have another object called an array list. So we're going to talk about that today. Let's look at the program that you're going to be asked to build first. So in this lecture, we're going to talk about building this one here. And what this is if you recall in our last lecture, I think it was our last lecture, we created a customer structure, and now what we're going to do is we're going to use that to be able to add customers to this form using this program here, and we're going to have an add button and a delete button, and also a test button, and then so we're going to do that in class, and then yours. Well, I'm sorry, we're going to have the delete part, and then you are going to build the add part yourself. Okay? Okay, so the outline of today's lecture is, first of all, in our last mini lecture, we discussed structures which allow us to combine several primitive data type members. So if you recall from our last lecture, we did something like this. We created a new class, and then we created this structure here, and it was a customer structure, and it consisted of 3 strings: the first name, the last name, and the email, and then also age as an integer. And then, if you recall, we also created a property. It was a read-only property, but it was a property, and it was called name, and that was to be filled in the top text box called text name, and that was read-only, and we created a property to handle this. So in the last mini lecture, we discussed structures, which allow us to combine several primitive data types. That means strings, for example, and integers, members, and we also created a single newly defined. And we created a single newly defined data type. It was customer. Along the way, we also discussed adding properties to structures, allowing us to separate internally visible and externally visible attributes, so that that last field that we just talked about was only it could only be changed by changing the other text boxes. You couldn't change it directly. And also we made composite properties. In this lecture, we continue our customer example with array lists, a special data type provided by the .NET framework. In other words, it's just a special data type that we have access to, which allows us to easily work with collections of structures. So in other words, we're going to use this customer structure that we already designed before, and we're going to have so each one of those is going to be a customer, and then we're going to have a collection of customers. We're going to have an array of customers, basically, but it's not an array, it's an array list of customers. But anyway, it's going to be many customers. Each customer is a structure, so many structures. So he calls it a collection of structures when we put them all into an array, or an array list, actually. Now I just want to go back to lecture 6 and just to remind you that we talked about enumerations before as well. So in our last lecture, we talked about structures, and we created a customer structure, but a while back we also talked about enumerations. So the example was this one here. Remember, we had something called, we created an enumeration called day action, and basically it's an association between these numbers, these integer values, and these strings. So asleep, getting ready for work, traveling to work, at work, and so on. So, okay, I just wanted to remind you of that. So, again, now we're going back to array lists. Okay, so Visual Basic provides a number of collections for developers. So this is an example of what is called a collection. It's a pre-made data structure, so it's an array list, something they already make for us, provided in the .NET framework, so they make it for us, located in the system.collections namespace. So that's just how you address the array list. So, it's like the address. These structures are conceptually similar to arrays, so they're very similar to arrays, but are pre-designed to be convenient for certain purposes. For instance, if we wanted to construct a client database, so we had a bunch of clients and we wanted to make a database via an ordered, now normally you would just do this with a database program, but if you wanted to sort of design your own database program, you could do it this way. Via an ordered list of structures of type customer. So in other words, we talked about customer before that was a structure, and now we're going to have a list of those, or a group of those, and it's going to be actually an array list. We could use a basic one-dimensional array, but we would have to resize the array before adding every new customer. So we could just have an array, but every time we wanted to add in a new customer, we'd have to do something like redim. So you can see that that would be kind of annoying. And customer deletion would also require a lot of cleanup, like shifting clients to fill the empty space created by deletion. So if you delete something, then you'd have an empty space there. You'd have to fool around with that, resizing the array to prevent empty elements at the end, and so on. All these things are kind of troublesome. So instead of using an array, we use an array list, which you don't have to do all of that with an array list. To help, .NET provides the array list, formerly system.collections.arraylist. So that's the formal address, but you don't always have to write that. So you can just write array list, which allows convenient runtime manipulation with auto cleanup, especially useful for cases where placeholding is not meaningful. Remember, we talked about in a bus, you have a fixed design of a bus, so you can talk. So the seats don't really change. So you might not want to use an array list. In that case, you might want to use an array. But remember, we talked about waiting in line for a movie. Maybe an array list would be better for that. Note, if empty elements are handy, we should probably use an array. So like in the case of a bus, you might want to use an array and keep the empty seats visible, or keep record of the fact that a seat is empty or not. If you use an array list, basically you don't have that ability. Let's examine array list by an example. So we're going to go back to our customer example from before. So we're going to expand our structure. Remember, a customer example was a structure demo example from last lecture. So array list example overview. Our plan. Expand the structure demo as follows. Expand the customers as follows. Add a list box to our form. We didn't have that before. To display all our customers and call it list customers. Make and use an array list to manage customer instances instead of using an array. The name of that array list is going to be called My Customers. Make a new subroutine to manage customer creation. So we're going to want to be able to add customers. We're going to create a new subroutine called add customer. And then we're going to call that function when we click a button, like the add button, for example. Add code so that customers in the list box are displayed by name and email. Okay, so of course, in the list box, you want to see the name of your customer, or you want to see the name and the email in this case, but you don't want to see some kind of strange display. You want to see something like this: Taro, APU, and the email. So actually, if we don't do what he writes here, then you'll see something strange. It won't look like this. But when we do what he says here, it'll end up looking like this. So anyway, to do this, we will override the toString method. Override basically means rewrite it. Now, maybe that doesn't make sense yet anyway, but we'll see a little bit more clearly later. Add code to allow us to select and delete a selected customer. So we're going to have that display box. We're going to have the a display box in the form, and then we can select an item and then delete it. So add code to allow us to select and delete a selected customer, along with a fully featured message box verification feature. So before we delete something, we get a message box generated saying, do you really want to delete this customer? Add code allowing us to display the data for a selected customer. So when the user clicks on the customer name in the list box, then the fields below, let me go back and show you. So here, let's see, this is the kind of, do you really want to delete message box? But anyway, going back to here, so here, when the user clicks on here, we want to display all the information in here as well. Okay. So add code allowing us to display the data for a selected customer. Okay, now let me stop this video and we'll continue here.